Hello and welcome to today's webinar. It's a continuing part of our series of customer showcase examples, partner showcase examples. And today we will be having Robin Bennett from Start Software presenting Developing Reliable Mobile Data Collection for Field Teams, or also known as Alpha Anywhere Meets the Real Indiana Jones. Now, Robin has promised that this will be an interesting webinar, so we'll see how that goes. Although I have seen part of it at the conference, and it was pretty darn good. So I think you're in for a treat. So two things before we get started. First of all, we do allow questions to be asked. Go ahead and type those questions into the questions box at the GoToWebinar control panel. Secondly, we will have a copy of a recording of the session available at videos.alphasoftware.com. So let's take it away. Hi there, Robin.
Hi, Dave. Thanks very much for that intro. Is this sound check okay?
Yeah, coming through loud and clear. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, and thanks everyone for joining us for the webinar today. As Dave tried to say, it's a webinar entitled Developing Reliable Mobile Data Collection for Field Teams. I think that's probably the longest webinar title in history. It's about half an hour long, I think, something like that, so plenty of time for questions at the end. It is based on a presentation I gave at the DevCon, as Dave mentioned, but it is different. So if you managed to sit through my presentation at the Boston conference and you stayed awake to the end, it is still worth staying awake to the end for this one because it is slightly different. So I hope it's got a bit of interest for everybody. There's some high-level stuff and there's a little bit of technical as well. So if you've joined us as a developer or you've joined us as a manager or somebody interested in collecting data in the field, hopefully there's something in here for you. A very brief introduction about Start Software. We're a software company based in the UK and Australia. We also have developers now in Indonesia. We sell our software mainly to the UK, to the English-speaking world, so that's UK, Australia, New Zealand, and a little bit in the US. We've been pretty much exclusively alpha-based for the last couple of years, and we switched from being a Microsoft shop to being an alpha shop when version 11 was launched. So I guess we've been into alpha for 4 or 5 years. We do have a lot of experience in field data collection. And I think over the last decade or so, we've captured something like 25 million items of data in field data capture apps, 25 million items. So it's a lot. Whole variety of applications, whole variety of industries, but having done that over the last decade or so in a variety of technologies and more recently in alpha, we're starting, I think, to get the hang of it slowly. As Dave said, the subtitle of the presentation, the Alpha Anywhere Meets Indiana Jones, that's the clue really to what the theme of the presentation's about. It's an archaeology application. Indiana Jones, of course, famously an archaeologist who had to deal with the perils of snakes, giant rolling boulders. I think, were there Nazis in one of the films? I think there was. There were. Our users, though, have to contend with real issues like mud, bright sunshine, and even the lack of internet signal. So that's what we've been talking. It wouldn't have made such a great film, but it's been a good challenge from an IT point of view. So let's get stuck in and see what's what. So here is the real Indiana Jones. This is Tim. Tim is our contact at Cotswold Archaeology, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Cotswold Archaeology shortly. So he is the real Indiana Jones. This is a shot I took of him out on a field trip when I went out to demonstrate the app to Tim's staff. And we'll cover what our client does in a second, but let's just look at the agenda for the webinar today. So a little bit of background about our client and the challenge that our client set us. I'll give you a demonstration of the app. Just not an in-depth one, not a training session, but just enough so that you understand what it is we're trying to build here and why it is we're building it for our client. We'll talk about the 3 key challenges we've faced, and although these are specific today to this archaeology application, in fact they're the challenges that face all application developers building something for field data collection. So there's something in here for everybody. Whatever your industry is, there's something in here for you. Finally, we'll have a recap if there's time and questions, no problem at all. Like I say, my actual presentation only takes about half an hour, so there should be plenty of time for questions at the end, which Dave will moderate. So a little bit of background about our client. They're a joy to work with. They're a fantastic organisation. They're commercial archaeologists, and to be honest, until we started this project, I didn't even know that commercial archaeologists actually existed. They're a big organisation, as you can see. I've done this in dollars just because many of the webinar attendees today are dialing in from the States. They're a big organisation who've worked on a lot of projects, and they work on some very large projects. Now, some of the work that's hopefully coming up for them includes our UK HS2 line. This is a railway line, high-speed 2, super fast railway line from initially, I think, London to Birmingham, then on to Manchester, Leeds and Sheffield. There's going to be some enormous amounts of archaeological work to do as part of this engineering project, and Cotswold are involved in all sorts of big, serious engineering and fieldwork projects. And you know, they're a serious organisation, and what they challenge us to do, Simon here, head of fieldwork, gave us this challenge, which you can read for yourselves. But the point is that they want to try and strip out the paper from the field aspect of archaeology in particular. Archaeology is actually really paper intensive. It's really paper heavy at the field end. So the guys out in the field archaeologists actually working on site, are generating huge amounts of paper at the moment. And Simon Cox there has said he wants us to try and produce an innovative paperless recording, analysis and archiving system that sets the standard for archaeological contractors. So that's what we've been challenged to do, and it is quite a big challenge, but you'll see today how we've tackled it and how we're starting to make real inroads for our client. This is just to give you a bit of an idea about where the archaeologists work and the sites that they work at. And this was a field trip that I made, and there is a pun intended there, because these are field staff actually working often in fields. What you see here, and hopefully on this image you can see the archaeologists and a wheelbarrow. There's a webinar with a wheelbarrow, that's probably a first. They're working here in a site which will eventually become a large housing development. So this is a pretty big sort of rural field site in a place called Lydney in Gloucestershire. That's about an hour away from our office in the Midlands here in the UK. And at this site there was a medieval, I believe, manor house, there's very little to see of that building now, but as well as that layer of archaeology, I think there are records older than that and newer than that. But once the housing development is in place, then clearly that archaeology will be somewhat hidden. And so the challenge given to Cotswold in this case is to document all of the archaeology that's there before the housing development is erected. So that's what they're doing. Here is a picture of some of the field archaeologists themselves. And I've put on the left-hand side here, these are our clients, and certainly when you're developing any field data application, any site data application, you need to really get your handle on who your customer is. And your customer isn't really the person in the suit with the checkbook who's perhaps signing off the invoice at the end of the job. You have to get in mind that your client, your customer, is in fact the person who's going to be working in the field, holding the tablet or the smartphone, capturing that information, and they have to be happy with it. You can see the sort of conditions they're working in. I mean, to this particular day I went, the weather was glorious, as it generally is in the UK, clearly, but if this was muddy, if it was wet, if it was cold, they need an application that's going to be robust and reliable, easy to use. There is no mobile signal in this location whatsoever, so there's no chance of somebody calling a help desk, asking for information about how to use the app, trying to understand an error code. It's got to just work. So we always bear in mind that our clients, when we're doing a field data capture app, are the guys actually going to be holding the device. And it's something that I recommend to anybody that's listening that's either building an app at the moment or thinking of building one. Just always bear that in mind. You've got to get your app in the hands of the guys that are going to use it to get the feedback you need to make it a workable system. I couldn't think of a better title for this slide, so there we go. It's men looking at screens, and that's what they are. That's this is John, who's our lead user. It's always really important to have a lead user, somebody that can give you the design input that you need. Something that you can see there is that he's got the tablet in his hand. These aren't expensive tablets that they've chosen to use, and I think very wisely, if you've ever bought tablet devices in particular, you'll know that there's a huge range of prices from the $100 Android tablets up to the $2,000 ruggedized, super robust, super corporate devices at the other end. They've decided to go for the cheap tablets with cases on the basis that, in my personal experience, the ruggedized ones in real use actually perhaps aren't as rugged as they seem, or if they do break, they're extremely expensive to replace. If you go with the cheaper end and you put them in decent cases, then they seem to last just as well and are probably better value for money. So let's have a look at an application to stop me talking, a bit more interesting for you. So if I just drag this across here. So hopefully you can all see this tablet here that I've got. I think I've got an iPad simulator going. Just before I kick off, I'll just mention this to any developers watching. If you've not used mobiletest.me before, I do recommend it. Mobiletest.me is the website name. What mobiletest.me allows you to do, it's a little bit like live preview in Alpha Anywhere in the sense of visualizing your app in a mobile device, but it's really, really slick. You just pass it the URL of the website or the app that you want to test, and you can test it in a whole variety of devices. You can test it in a whole variety of styles and options available, including things like portrait or landscape. It's a free service to a certain extent, but if you want to sign up for, I think there's a subscription you can pay into, where you get a bigger choice of devices and some more options, but we tend to just use the free service, and it works really nicely. So I'm simulating it here on an iPad, just to give you an idea. I'll log in. And this is the interface that we've chosen. It's a responsive interface, so if I logged in on a smartphone, I'd see a different style of interface. If I logged in on a bigger tablet, I'd see a different one. Still, on the right-hand side here, we have a number of projects that this user is able to see. And this is obviously an alpha list. If you're an alpha developer, you'll recognize what we've done here. It's searchable, obviously, at the top. And these projects have been set up on a desktop back-end, back-office part of the system, which I'm not going to demo today because we're talking mainly about the site data capture. But the actual creation of the projects, initially, it would be done by back-office staff on a desktop browser. So let me just give you a little indication here. If I go, this is all just test data, obviously, I'm showing you here. If I go into one of the projects, I have two buttons, area trenches and context. I'll explain what contexts are in a minute. I'll go into the areas and trenches that I have available to me, and I'll pick a context, this one here, context 1000. Now contexts, just to let you know what they are, these are things that have been recorded. So it could be a cut. Now a cut, I believe, is a feature in the ground, which we're going to look at in a minute on a photo. It could be a piece of pottery, an artifact, a medal, a coin. It could be something more substantial. It could be some masonry, some bricks, or it could even be a skeleton. In fact, we're going to look at a skeleton later, or part of a skeleton, either human bones or some animal remains. So that's what a context is, and each one has a number. This one's number 1000. If I click through here, we're now looking at the sort of electronic equivalent of the paper form that we have been trying to strip out of their process. So at the moment they have paper forms for different types of information that they're capturing. So a different form for a skeleton from a piece of masonry, obviously different information to capture. Here we have some drop downs. You can see here the sorts of drop downs that we have. And I can go next and I end up with a screen asking me for dimensions of the cut. Here is quite an interesting one. This is showing us where this particular find or feature exists in context with others, and in these boxes we could be choosing or entering the context numbers of the things that were physically found above it in the ground or below it in the ground. We've got 8 above and 8 below, so this is a sort of a cut through the ground, if you like. Here we've got some other information, all again straight off a paper form. Some more information, So you can see there's quite a lot for each type of form, and then we're back to the start. We've just got some debugging information on here at the moment, just because this is a work in progress. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how the system works. If I just go back, let me just show you a couple of other buttons here which will come into play later on. Allocating context numbers and entering context numbers ranges. Just bear those in mind when we come to the offline part of the presentation right at the end of the webinar. So there's our little demo. Gives you an idea of what the application is. So just to recap, they log in, they see all of the jobs, all of the projects they could be working on, they choose the one that they're in. They then choose the trench that they're in, and then here are the items that they've captured, and they can create new ones, they can work on the ones that they've already perhaps put in. At this stage, it looks fairly standard. They can send the data, if they do have an internet connection, they can send their data in at this point. And something that we built in from quite early on in the application is this storage manager facility feature, where it's showing us how much of local storage is in use by the app. We did find in our early days that the way we were storing the data locally meant that we could start to reach the limits of local storage in an app on a handset quite quickly. So we are now showing the users how much space they've used up, so they have opportunity to send the data in before they actually run out of room. So there's that little demo. Let's just hop back to our presentation and talk about the challenges. I said there were going to be 3 challenges we're looking at. The first one is practicalities. Not particularly technical, the next couple of slides, but really, really important to the creation of a successful field data application. Secondly, speed of operation. This is where it gets a little bit more technical, a bit more interesting for any developers in on the webinar today. And thirdly, we'll cover the offline working aspect. Now, part of this offline working is the very clever tech that Selwyn and the team, the developers at Alpha, have put into the product, so that pretty much it's a deploy and forget operation. If you want reliable offline data capture and transmission, Alpha will do it for you, as long as you've configured it in the right way. So part of it is done for you, but there's just a couple of tricks you need to know, which I'll explain later. Part of this, though, is to do with the nature of this particular application, which meant that offline working was incredibly difficult to achieve. And I'll explain that right at the end of the webinar, and it's probably the most interesting part of what I've got to cover today. So let's look at some of the practicalities and what can get in the way of a successful deployment of your field data capture application. Well, the first one is simple. It's Glare. You can see here that the day I visited site with the tablets for the users to try, it was incredibly sunny. And in fact, you can see that they really genuinely could hardly see the screen because of the glare of the sun. Now, however good your app is, however good your tablet is, if they can't see the screen, users are not going to rate your application. So you've just got to think about it. Interestingly, these particular users use a whole range of other tech in their jobs, things like GPS locators and radar devices. Those also struggle in strong sunshine. So it's not just a problem limited to tablet devices. And obviously, you can choose different styles of screen technology to work better in bright sunshine, but just be aware, if your users are going to be outdoors, especially in a climate with strong sunshine, doesn't normally affect the UK, then you do need to think about the practicalities of actually being able to see the screen. This one I've called drop-down, drop-out data, and this one's a little bit more interesting. What we have here is a cut feature. I believe this is a cut. On the right-hand side, hopefully on this photo you can see that the right-hand edge that I'm just moving the cursor over now is relatively straight. But the left-hand side, as we look at it, has got this sort of curve to it. Well, on our cut data capture screen, which was a direct take off the paper form, there's only actually one option. We didn't have an option for right-hand side and left-hand side. The assumption was that the feature would be the same shape both sides. Now, on a paper system, paper form, that's no problem, is it? Because the user simply writes on the form outside the box, literally outside the box, left-hand side different, left-hand side was curvy. But on a tablet device where you've done fixed drop-downs, if there's only one selection available, that's all the user can choose, and they feel like the data quality is being compromised because they're using an electronic system as opposed to a paper system. So the solution to that is quite simple. Pretty much on every drop-down you create, you need an other option. So you've got your list of fixed options, you have one that says other. That one then prompts to say what other, fill in more information, have a notes box, have a memo field. So that's what we mean by drop-down, drop-out data. It always catches you out. If you don't do that from the outset, you can guarantee that's one of the first things your users will say. Next one, this is the third of four, is water. And here's quite an interesting difference between an analog system like paperwork and a digital system. Here we have an example of a masonry context sheet, so brickwork in other words, that's been found, and it's got a little bit of water damage. It's got wet, it's got rained on. But the degradation is gradual, and most of it you can sort of read through the blur. In fact, Cotswold archaeology, like most archaeologists, use special paper and special ink which is very water resistant. So this has probably got very wet in order to show any degradation at all. But the degradation is analog and still gives you the chance to look through to see what the original writing was. Of course, in a digital system, in a tablet device, if you've got a tablet that gets soaking wet that isn't water resistant, or even is water resistant but the water's still managed to get in, you could lose all of the data that's been captured. So the potential is for catastrophic data loss if your device gets wet. Now they've gone for cheaper tablets but in waterproof cases, which is doing the job. The other one to think about actually with water, which perhaps isn't quite so obvious, is even the waterproof devices, when their screens get water on them, they become unresponsive because the tablet seems to pick up the water as a screen press sometimes. So you've just got to think that through. Is your application, could it be affected by water? And of course there's other environmental problems as well, like dust or other aspects that you have to think about when you're just thinking about the practicalities. Finally is this issue of big maps. Now it's not a particularly big site plan actually. They are using much bigger plans than this. The temptation when you're trying to get rid of paper always is to get rid of every single piece of paper, and you can become very dogmatic about this. And very often when we've designed field data capture applications for our customers, they've assumed that we'll be digitizing plans from the outset and everybody will be looking at a plan or a map only on the screen. Now on a smartphone, that's almost always useless because the smartphone screen just simply is too small and too clumsy to find your way around a big plan. Tablets, it can be doable, but of course in this instance I think paper is such a brilliant technology that if it didn't exist you would have to invent it. So we actually recommend that plans in particular, which can be folded, they can be shoved in pockets, they can be scribbled on and drawn on, are typically left on paper. But the digital bit is that we incorporate into our app the facility to take a photo of a plan at the end, or at the beginning for that matter, so that the digital version of the site plan or map can be embedded in the data, transmitted to the server, and you've got that digital copy should you need it. But don't be frightened of paper if paper is in fact the best solution for a particular job. So second challenge, that's the practicalities out of the way. Let's have a look at operating speed. Now operating speed is an interesting one. Just before I get into the alpha bits and pieces here, on my own smartphone I've got an internet banking app which probably takes 25 to 30 seconds each time I log in, but it's always taken that amount of time, so I'm just completely used to it and completely accept that's how long it takes. I'm probably accepting of that amount of time, which is a very long time, because the app is so incredibly useful to me. However, in this particular case, the initial version of the app that we gave the users logged in just, say, 2 or 3 seconds, but later versions of the app started taking 10 or 15 seconds, and the users found it completely unacceptable. And so I think there's an interesting psychological point here, that sometimes users will accept slow response if it's always been slow, or if the app is particularly useful, but they won't accept it if the performance actually drops. So let's have a look at what was causing the speed problem in this particular app, and I'm going to get some code up in a minute, so there's a spoiler alert here if you're not into code, but I'll be very brief. Essentially, if you remember the demo that I just showed, the application is built with lots of lists, and the lists have got forms attached. And one of the ways you can do that in alpha is something called a detail view of a list. But in a detail view, each part of the form is in fact its own control. And let me just show you what I mean. So if I just go back into here and bring it up on the screen, here is a detail view with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think it's 8 controls, and on this screen there's another 3, and on this screen there's another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you get the idea. So there could easily be 50 controls here in this one detail view on that one part of the application. Now what we found is that lots of detail views, and there are lots of different forms in here, equals lots of controls slows the application down. Let me just drop you into alpha itself so I can show you what I mean here. These are the controls here in the UX Builder in alpha that relate to that form I was just showing you. And you can see each field is a control in the UX. And very quickly you get very long lists here of controls. So it can get a bit cumbersome, and the more controls seems to be the slightly slower that the application starts to run. The solution here we picked up actually at the Boston conference. Is one of the reasons the Boston conference was so good for us, the DevCon, was a new feature in alpha, which I believe Dan Bricklin and Selwyn have worked together on, which is the form view and editors. And if I just show you another part of the application, if I go back and we look at a different project, and this time I'm going to look at this one, and in here we have a skeleton feature. Here we have another form which looks very similar to the form you've just seen, the cut feature. It's a form with fields on it, but in fact these individual fields are not individual controls in the alpha UX Builder. This is what's called a form view, and whenever you tap on one of the fields it drops across to an editor where I can make a change to the information, and then that drops me back on the list. That works the same way for drop-down lists, or yes-nos, or true-falses, or radio button selectors, and even things like, as you're about to see, even things like editing skeletons. If I go through, you see here we have a skeleton that's been found, and the users need to annotate which bits were missing, or they need to color bits in, or whatever. This is all done through a single form view control using one of the new editors, in this case an ink editor, annotating an image that's already there. Now if I show you this in alpha, you'll get the idea. So if I just find my skeleton form, you'll see that the whole form and all of the controls on it are one single control. It's this form view control, which if I drop into the detail behind it, it links across to a list of information. This shows me the fields that are available. I can drop on the fields that I want, and all of this setup here is hidden within one single control within the UX Builder. The editors where you actually make the changes, those are separate controls, but you only need one editor of each type. So you only need one text box editor, that's what I've got on the screen here. You only need one drop-down list editor or one ink editor. So overall across the whole application you're saving hugely on the number of controls, and what we found is that the speed improvement is enormous. The application just isn't slowing down now, despite the fact that there are lots and lots of forms and lots of controls, because we're doing it in this form view way. So if you've got an app that's struggling with performance, form view is really useful, and recommend it that you try it out. It's excellent, an excellent new feature that's come into alpha. So finally, the offline challenge. Why was this so difficult? Well, it's because most of the time, most of the users will have no internet whatsoever. It's not like they've got a slow dial-up or a slow internet, they just won't have internet. This gives us a few problems. First one is offline login. This has to be secure, this application, so there has to be a login process, but how on earth can they log in if the app can't get back to the server to check the login credentials? Well, the way we solve this is that we use a process where you need to be able to log in once online to log into the tablet. So that can be done back at the office with the first time you're given the tablet. Beyond that, the login credentials are stored in local storage on the tablet in a secure way as possible, so that the logins can be validated offline from that point. Something you need to think about, though, in your application if you want a secure app, but you don't think you're going to have internet connection most of the time. Secondly, Alpha's offline capability, as I've mentioned, is brilliant. It's genius. But it doesn't always give the user an immediate confirmation if something has worked, or indeed if it hasn't worked. So you do need to build those in. So again, think about your users when they send data, when they sync. They'll want to see a positive confirmation. Alpha's got the events, it's got the hooks to do that. You just need to make sure that the users are seeing information so they can be sure that when they've pressed the button, a sync has been made. Thirdly, there's a feature in Alpha called the sync log. And this is a very useful feature if you're in a situation where your users may be in and out of coverage. If I bring up a list, I'll show you where that feature is. It's something that is sort of, it's not buried, but it's sort of, you've got to know where it is to find it. It's in the detail view option on this particular control that I'm working on, and it's got this synchronization log table, or sync log. And the purpose of this is it's like somebody watching over the sync process. So when a user makes a call back to the server to sync their data, Alpha is storing information about the sync in another part of the server and keeping an eye on the sync process to make sure it's worked correctly. Without this in place, you can occasionally get records being saved twice back to your system. So for example, a field salesman captured a quote for a customer, sends it in, he sends the data in, it hits the server, but before the server has confirmed back to the app that all is well, the app loses connection. When he next syncs, the same record will go back. With the sync log on, that doesn't happen. The sync log ensures that only one copy of that quote ends up back in the database, which is you want. So that's a useful feature. If you've not tried it yourself, the sync log is a useful one. And I think finally now, just starting to head towards the wrap-up, the final problem here was where to do with serial numbers being required there and then, and they have to be unique serial numbers, even if there's no internet connection. Typically, in an application, for example, the one I was just talking about, where you have a salesman generating a quote offline, the salesman doesn't need to know the quote number or the quote ID at the point of generating the quote on the app. It's enough that the salesman knows that they've got the client details, the product details, the price, whatever, and when the quote hits the server can generate an ID for that quote and then tell the app what it is. And that might be later on when the salesperson gets home and syncs off their home Wi-Fi. However, in this situation in the archaeological app, that isn't good enough, because when the finds are taken out of the ground, they're labelled immediately with unique numbers. Now, this is a picture of the ground itself with a piece of plastic with context numbers, serial numbers written on, and literally the piece of plastic, the label, nailed to the floor. So when the app generates a number, it needs to do it there and then, even without a connection back to the server. And if there are 10 archaeologists working on a particular site, we have to be sure that those serial numbers are unique. Not only that, they need to be serial numbers. They can't be randomly generated GUID type long, long strings of letters and numbers. They've got to be serial numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They've got to be in a sequence across the whole project. So how did we tackle this? Well, it sounds like a completely impossible problem, and at the DevCon, it was the thing that got people most interested, and we had a good 10-15 minute chat about it. I'll cut the solution short for you. What we really did was we went back to the mechanism that they use at the moment on paper. The project manager in the back of the wagon has this sheet which is called the context register. And the way it works on paper is the archaeologist goes to the project manager and says, I need another 5 context numbers. The project manager allocates those numbers and writes them on the register. The archaeologist goes back to the place at the dig where he's working, uses those 5 numbers, no problem. We've replicated this in our app, The project manager has a login to the app which allows them to create ranges of numbers in what is in fact an offline list. He or she then types that number range into the app for the archaeologist, and the app then allocates numbers within that range until they run out. Then the archaeologist needs to get another set. The clever bit is that all of this works perfectly offline. It also works perfectly online. If on a particular project the archaeologists and project managers have a connection, then all of this information is instantly synced to the server, and in fact the context numbers can be generated by the server. So it's a completely offline or online solution. And we're pleased with it. It's worked very well. The coder at Start Software, Dan, he's done a great job with this, and I think it's going to work, and it's going to work not least because it mirrors their current process, so it's understandable. So there we go. So there's our the webinar really coming to a close. A couple of points just for the recap before I hand back to Dave and any questions. Get your field staff involved early. They're your customers, they're your clients. Make sure they're going to be happy with what you're doing. Whatever operation you do on the app itself, give positive confirmations to your users. If you're having problems, whether it's performance problems or other issues, or you just need ideas, keep a conversation going with the Alpha development team. We found that to be incredibly useful. They'll either point you in the right direction, they might set up a screen share with you, they might even change the product to suit your requirement if it's something that's going to benefit other people. We have it's a fantastically responsive relationship we have with Alpha. And don't be afraid of paper. If you think paper is the best solution, use it. Our example was the map, the plans. They're big plans, big maps. They can be folded up, put in a pocket. You can still digitize them through the app, through taking a photograph of them at the end, so you've got a digital copy. But don't be afraid of paper, even if you're trying to go paperless. So, there you go, Dave. Hope that was okay. We've got time, I think, for questions if anybody's posted any.
That was fantastic. And we do have a few questions, but only a few questions. So if
Good.
you are out there and you've got questions, go ahead and type them in. Let's flood Robin with questions. So.
Let's not. I've got my dinner on the table here.
Oh, no, I'm sorry about that. Right? It's coming up on 7 o'clock, isn't it there? Yeah. All right, so the first one you actually already addressed, but I'll just repeat it anyway. And what devices are being used, and are they ruggedized?
Right, so yeah, not ruggedized. They're cheap Android, relatively cheap Android tablets with waterproof cases. And I do recommend that. Ruggedized has got a place. One of the things I didn't mention as I was chatting is that some, not Cotswold, but some organisations we've worked with, the field staff, if they're given a device they're told is unbreakable, seem to make it a badge of honour to be the first person to break one. So it almost works in reverse.
That's great. And the second part of that is, did the app use any RFID or barcodes or anything like that, or is it basically pictures and text?
At the moment, it's pictures and text. I think both barcode and RFID are and QR code are all in mind. So yeah, at the moment it's photographs, sketches, site plans, and text data.
Great. So we have a couple of people asking about storage. The first question is basically, how are you storing data? Are you using SQLite or something like that? Or are you just using list control? And then someone else asks, can you actually show us what you did for storage?
Okay. We're not using SQLite in this application, mainly because, so if you're not aware of what SQLite is, it's a means of storing larger tables of information, lookup lists and product lists, for example, on your tablet or your smartphone itself. So it's a mini SQL database that's available to the Alpha app that you can use to store large amounts of data and quickly get it back. We haven't needed to use SQLite in this particular one because, in fact, the lookup lists and and static lists are all fairly small. The data that gets captured is all captured in offline lists in local storage. Although obviously for media data we're not storing it in the same way. One thing we have used is the client-side data cache to populate lists, so that's very useful. So where we've got things like lookup lists, high, medium, low, or straight, curly, square, whatever, lists of different choices for drop-down lists, we are using the new features in Alpha for doing that and caching those in offline storage.
That's great. someone commented that they were interested in this context panel. In other words, it had had a diagram in it, and it showed sort of where it fit in the.
Yeah.
Can you show us that panel and where it exists in alpha?
Oh, there's a good question. I'm not sure.
Okay, that's
I probably can if I just drag. I will do it on my second screen while you're asking me another question.
All right, that sounds great. And so probably you'll have a few more questions about storage. And one good one was, how were you able to calculate how much storage was used so that you could display it there in that panel?
Goodness me, these are great questions. That's code for I need to look up how I did that. I can't remember.
Okay, that's fine.
It was actually Tom, our developer, that did that. There is a mechanism where you can find out in local storage what percentage you've used. Yeah. If you want to, Dave, if you want to capture that person's details, if that's possible, we can get back to them and let them know.
I will, and actually, if you have questions that we can't get to today, please send an email to guides, guides, @alphasoftware.com, and I will get you the answers. Or Robin will get you the answers, but I'll get it from Robin. How about, okay.
Ask me an easy one.
I'll ask you an easy one, all right. Oh, well, see, I don't know if they're easy, but this one had to do with, well, how long did it take? Excluding the design process, how much did it take to actually do the building and the testing of this application so far?
It's weeks, not months. We've been on and off with this one because just for various reasons, it's been a couple of weeks on and then a few months off until we've had some feedback from the users. We're actually at the moment, since the DevCon, since we came back from Boston and we've started to work on the form view aspect, then it's been much more of an intensive process. We're expecting to finish this completely by the end of this calendar year, so by the end of next month, December. And that's going to be quite a substantial piece of work because we've got, I think it's 7 or 8 different types of thing context that can be captured. So that skeleton was one. We've got a child skeleton. We've got an infant as well to put in. We've got other things. So it's an intensive process at the moment. Should be finished by the end of the year. I think probably then what will happen is in the springtime we'll have a second round of developments. If it goes down well with the users, then we'll be adding some extra things, perhaps some more interactive multimedia stuff like video or the barcoding RFID that people mentioned.
That's great. So a quick clarification before you go crazy looking for that context example is it looks like they're just more interested in how does it function inside the application. In other words, what does it do and how would it be used out in the field?
Okay, that's an easy one. Thank you, Dave. Thank you for rescuing me because I can't find the screen. If I just bring it back.
Once you get live on a webinar, it becomes 10 times harder to do anything.
That's for sure. So let's find that one for you. So if I go back to the actual screen, and it was this one I was using before. Right, yeah, so this is the screen I think we were talking about.
That's right.
Yeah, cool. So what we've got here is, if I just go back again, this is context number 1000. It's a probably bad example because it's a cut feature, but let's suppose it was a piece of pottery. And this was piece of pottery number 1000, but it was found below some brickwork, and the brickwork was number 1023, and there's also another brick. This is very small writing, but I hope you can see I'm actually typing something in. So essentially, physically in the ground, this gives the user the opportunity to say above it, so before I found this piece of pottery, I had already found this, and this, and up to 8 of them. And then when I dug the pottery out of the ground, below it were another 8 items, context, 8 things below. And the way this works is, I mentioned this is very paper intensive in archaeology. It is in the field end, but there are various database standards and databases that exist at the back end of this process. And this enables the system to automatically, as you can imagine, draw diagrams sort of as if they're sort of a cross-section through the ground of what was above and below. And I guess I'm no expert clearly in archaeology, but I guess this gives an indication of age. So the lower in the ground, the older the thing. So the fact that they're recording what's above and below, and of course if this was 999 on 999's page, 999 would be in the middle, I'd have something below that, and I could go down any number of layers. So it's like a hierarchy of where in the ground the contexts were found and therefore the age of what was found.
Interesting. Thank you. A bunch of questions about the login, and so one question that comes to mind is you said that sort of the tablet gets authorized one time when you're online. It checks the credentials, and then from then on it's free to use it. Do you have the notion of credentials expiring, or being able to shut that off?
Actually, no, we don't. It's a great question. We don't have an expiry on this. I was watching another demo yesterday where somebody had built in a login expiry, and I think that's a really good idea that we should be incorporating. The other part, what I didn't mention, which I'll mention now, is this is actually a two-fold authentication. There's a password part to it, username and password, but there's also a physical ID of the device part. Now, this is a phone-gapped app, so just to be clear, although I'm showing it here in a mobile emulator, this is actually a phone-gapped app, so it's a standalone app that operates Android or iOS or Windows, I guess, on a handset. The phone gap has access to a unique identifier for the device that the app is installed on, and we can access that unique ID through Alpha. And what we've done with logins is we've done a twofold thing. It's the user ID and password has to be correct, but also the device has to have been authorized for that user. This is to stop somebody getting hold of this app, perhaps a competitor of Cotswold Archaeology, and sort of working out how it's, logging in, finding a way to log in or breaking the login or doing something. There's an additional level, so there's actually a physical level of security as well. So we're checking user ID, password, we're also checking that the particular device is authorized using this unique ID that's available through PhoneGap back to Alpha Anywhere.
Oh, that's great. So someone asked, did you run into any particular difficulties when doing photo uploads or managing space or anything like that with photos? And where are those getting put, by the way? Because is that being put in the file system, or
I think it has changed, and I'm not absolutely sure, but I think it's now going up to S3, which is how we build most of our field data capture apps now. So the media storage that now is built into Alpha in terms of immediate transfer and up to S3. If you've not had a look at Amazon S3, the bucket idea is phenomenal, absolutely brilliant. Yeah. Take a look at that. I'm pretty sure this one has now been switched to S3, but I couldn't swear to it. But that means that the photos themselves are stored outside of the local storage, so don't impact on that figure that I showed at the beginning of the webinar.
That's great. We have someone else who's written in asking, are you using geolocation features?
We are, and in fact what we've just put in, one of our developers, Rowan, yesterday was working on this feature. Some of the features that they're looking at, and if I just flick back to the presentation, if I go back to that sort of ditch in the ground, or cut as it's called, you can see roughly that feature there. The orientation of the feature is important to them. So if this, is this feature north-south, or is it pointing east-west, or is it at 45 degrees? So the actual direction of the feature can be really significant. And what we've done is we've hooked into the orientation sensor now on the tablets. I'm pretty sure it's one of the PhoneGap plugins that Alpha exposes. If it's not, it was quite straightforward to put in. And yesterday afternoon, Rowan was showing me that now when they're recording a trench like this, a cut, then at the same time the app can be recording the direction that the cut is facing, and that's something else that they won't have to do manually.
Very cool. So you've mentioned you have multiple developers working on this project. You mentioned a few of their names, but so if you are using multiple developers at the same time, and this is just a general question about Alpha development, how do you manage doing that, basically, so people aren't sort of stepping on each other's toes?
Right, it does take a little bit of working through, but it is possible, and it works quite well for us. What we use is a source control system called Subversion. If you're familiar with Git, Subversion is a similar product to that. Okay. And all of our Alpha UXs, grids, XBasic code is stored in the version control system, and we have quite a disciplined process, so that if I'm picking up this app, I update my local copy of the project from Subversion. That's just a one-click job and it brings it down. I then work on it, I publish, I test, and then I commit back to the source control. And we run a Skype running chat between the developers who are working on the project, because 3 or 4 people can be working on this at the same time on any particular day. We run a Skype group chat so that once I've committed, I just tell the rest of the team that I've made a commit. Most of the time, if we're working in different parts of the system, the commits will never interfere with each other. It's only really if we're working on something that affects the system system-wide, so security or menus, that sort of thing. In that case, what we would do then is we would all just update, bring ourselves back up to date, and then continue to work. The source control system Subversion is really cool. It handles the sort of conflicts so that we know if somebody has conflicted with somebody else, and it's a workable process. The only issue that we have, Dave, is with multiple time zones at the moment. That gets a little bit complicated, and we do have a project, not this particular one, we do have a project where developers are working in Indonesia, are ahead of us here in the UK, and then it gets a little bit more complicated, but we're just talking to the Alpha development team at the moment to see if there's something that can be enhanced there for multi-time zone development. But if you're working in the same time zone or perhaps an hour out, it's fine, it works. But again, I'd be quite happy to share our experience with others if there's somebody who's got a particular question.
Excellent. Yeah, it does look like people do have interest here in Subversion. Is this a Apache or do you know?
Subversion it's an open source version control system, SVN or Subversion. I'm no expert in competing products, but I do know it's very similar to something like Git.
Like Git.
Yeah.
And do you know why you guys chose that over Git, which seems to be the one that everyone uses?
Probably because we hadn't heard of Git when we chose it. I think it was one of our developers. It was one of our developers
said, "Hey, I know how this works. Let's use it."
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. That's how it all works, isn't it? I've just popped our own website on. If somebody does want to contact me afterwards and they don't, they want to get our details, this is the easiest way to find us.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, of course. Start-software.com.
That's it.
Great. We have time for a couple more questions. Someone else is just sort of pointing out that they've been using Subversion for years for their Alpha projects. So that's something we need to take a look at here at Alpha, because I have a feeling it's more widespread than we know about. During the part of your presentation where you talked about practicalities, you talked about glare and you talked about water. The water one looks like you solved by putting them in a waterproof case. What do you do about glare? Is there anything?
They've just, there's virtually nothing they can do. They've, as I think I mentioned, they do have other equipment which suffers exactly the same problem. So when I saw them really struggling to read the screen, I internally I was thinking this could be a showstopper. This could be a thing that breaks our project. In fact, they just said, "Oh no, it's fine. We're used to this. We just manage." And
okay.
I was being ironic when I said that obviously the sun shines in the UK. That was an exceptional day. So,
yeah,
but I guess
no problem at all, right? Yeah.
In your part of the world, it could be a serious problem. I guess what you'd be looking at is a tablet device with a different type of technology, so an e-ink style screen, I guess, would be the only solution, or perhaps a polarized filter or something. I don't know, but it can be a real problem. Interesting.
Let me see if we have any other questions here. Oh, someone else writing in saying SVN is great. Let's see. I don't see anything else. If you guys have another question, now is the time to submit it. Let me just take a quick look through the list to make sure I didn't miss anything. And if I did miss anything, don't forget you can always send an email to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. Would you be able to, and you can absolutely say no, show us where in the app?
I'm sorry, I was a bit quick.
All right, next question. Could you show us how storage is used? In other words, where in the app you're doing your list control or things like that? I think people would just like to take a peek at the underpinnings of the app.
Do you know what, I'm going to say no to that, only because it's a while since I've been in this code, and what I'll do instead is if you want to just if people want to contact us, drop us an email. I'll do a 2 or 3 page explanation. I'll get Tom or Dan to do that so that you've got it from the developers rather than an idiot, which is me.
don't think so, but thank you very much. We did have the question about the form control. So you were using the form view control.
Yep.
And the question was, let me just find it here. Sorry about that. I know it's here. Hang on a second. Is the form view control, they ask, is it read-only? Is there any way to let the users fill in fields without opening up a detail window?
Okay, right. Yeah, good question. Good question. It's mainly read-only, so it does tend to work better. Let me just find. I can just chat actually about it. Yeah, it does tend to work best on. I personally think on smaller screen devices where the tap to get to the editor bit seems to be a bit more intuitive than a bigger screen device where you naturally assume that you can edit in place. Saying that, anybody that was at the DevCon or anybody that's watched Dan Bricklin's videos on this, he is putting some types of control to be editable in place. I think some of the
switches,
switches, stuff like that, exactly, yeah. So some of the things that are yes, no's or switches between choices can be done in place, but things like drop-down lists or number editors or text boxes, they go off to an editor screen. I'm going to give Dan some feedback on that because we have had some feedback from users on bigger tablets. They feel it would be nice if the editor could somehow live on the same screen.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'll take a look at that.
I guess that's something that Dan might be able to look at.
Yeah. In fact, I think that is possible. But yeah, actually, I'll go and research that as well, because I think I've seen an example of that, to be honest with you.
Okay, cool.
It doesn't have to be on a different panel. It could be elsewhere on the screen. You could put it in a different div, but we'll look at that offline.
Okay, cool. That'd be great. I'd like to see that too, yeah.
So the last question before we wrap up was just about how many users can it handle when it's online? Did you have to, are you using a cloud or is it an on-premise storage? In other words, how are you handling the server piece?
Yeah, the server, it's currently an on-premise server, which is a shared server. It's got a SQL server on it that's serving lots of applications out, and the nature of this application is such that it won't cause the server any stress whatsoever. So it'll be certainly, I mean, they've got 180 staff. It would be able to cope with that, no problem. The only impact you have to think about with because they're not online all the time. The only impact you have to think about with field data apps like this, ones that work offline in particular, is that you do tend to get that flood of data upload at the end of the day. And even on relatively small numbers of users, you've just got to think that through. So if you're running an operation where everybody at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock is going to hit the upload button, how do you handle that process? And that's, of course, where Alpha Cloud could come into play, or multiple servers, or multiple instances of the app server running just to share the load. That might be a sensible thing. There's other techniques you can use. Yeah, load balancing, all sorts of techniques there you can use. But that's the only thing you need to be aware of with field data capture, is you do get that big push typically at the end of the day and at the start of the day where people are pulling data down to their apps to get their day's workload. You've just got to manage that busy period, start and finish of the day.
Fantastic. So someone asked about application updates. How do you handle that when it's time to update the application? How do you get new versions down onto people's tablets?
We haven't had to face it with this app yet.
Okay.
In general, what we do is, only because it's still in development and only being piloted by certain groups of users, in general what we do is we just do it all off QR code. So if we're building phone-gapped apps, then we distribute QR codes and just say update yourself. It's as simple as that. So we just tell users when it happens.
Send out an email blast or something and say, hey guys,
exactly.
Version right here.
Exactly. Okay. Of course, there are better techniques available now through Alpha. With the Alpha launch, I think that's going to come up at some point.
Alpha launch will do that. Yeah.
Yeah. That can handle that. And there's other mechanisms you can use. And you can, if you're in an environment where you're going to be online most of the time, of course, you can keep most of your app online and just keep just the sort of the login shell bit offline in the app, and then you can constantly be updating without people updating at all, which is essentially what the Alpha launch is all about. So there are techniques you can use if it's going to be an issue for you. Most of the apps that we've used, though, we've just, as you say, sent out an email broadcast with a QR code. Just download it straight off the device.
That's fantastic. Well, we are out of time. We've used up our hour. So
Excellent.
Thank you very much, Robin, for presenting. This is a very, very interesting presentation, and I'm seeing a lot of positive feedback from people who are writing in. If we didn't get to your question, or you think of a question afterwards, by all means, send it to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. And Robin also can be contacted directly. He is a consultancy, sir. What do you call yourself? A development agency?
Yeah, we're software house. Yeah, software
house. Yeah. Startsoftware.com. Worth checking out. So thank you again, and we'll see you next week at a future webinar. A copy of today's recording will be posted in a couple of days to videos.alphasoftware.com. Thanks again, and have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.